Let's go to Mr. Sina Toossi and see what he has to say. I'm sorry if the volume is up. Okay, Mr. Toossi.
Hello, yes.
Thank you for being with us. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And let me explain for you, to my viewers. Our next guest is Sina Toossi in Washington, D.C. Your organization, NIAC, advocate dialogue with Iran rather or instead of war. Where did MEK fit into the political landscape under Trump? I also know your organization had some problem with Mujahideen, and they didn't attack you directly. They had a member that was paid to hire so many lawyers to come after NIAC, and that's another story that we can talk about it later. But right now, especially after election, if you can explain MEK and the landscape of political during Mr. Trump, also after Mr. Biden comes to White House.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be on. And I also want to say that Mr. Khodabandeh's comments were very insightful for me. Like, his personal story is very, very astonishing, and I thought that was very informative. So thanks for doing this program. Now, so like you said, I work at the National Iranian American Council, known as NIAC. It's the largest grassroots Iranian American organization, and we're based here in Washington, D.C. And among the many issues we work on, we're an Iranian American advocacy organization. We work on kind of domestic issues, empowering Iranian Americans, having Iranian Americans run for Congress, civil rights, civil liberties issues. But also, we are active in the foreign policy debate in Washington, and within this debate, we argue more for U.S. policies of diplomacy towards Iran, and not these policies of kind of pressure and these collectively punishing sanctions, which, in our belief, these kind of policies, they are not only harmful towards U.S. national security interests, but they also harm the Iranian people, ordinary Iranians first and foremost, and they really destroy the potential for peaceful democratic change. Now, we can get into this later, but for example, if you're looking at the Trump administration's maximum pressure policy, by starving the Iranian people, by impoverishing the middle class, this is not how you're going to create a situation conducive to Iran becoming a prosperous, democratic country. And, that is certainly not the aim of Trump and, his senior advisors. And I think that is where the MEK enters the picture. Now, the MEK, as Mr. Khodabandeh touched on, they've gained a lot of outsized influence in Washington, primarily through dumping a lot of money on politicians, former officials, huge speaking fees for people who go speak at their events, tens of thousands of dollars, on Capitol Hill here in Congress. They throw these big events, free food, they invite people, high-profile kind of speakers that they pay a lot of money. It's unclear where they get this money from, but they clearly have very powerful backers, financial backers, and we can get into that more later. But in the Trump era, the MEK has come to greater prominence, and we've seen that, senior Trump advisors, especially his former national security advisor, John Bolton, and his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, they've been long-time proponents of the MEK, taken their money, spoken at their rallies, and they've been staunch regime change activists, and they want to topple the Iranian government. They push for policies of war and kind of confrontation with respect to Iran. John Bolton, of course, is notably a vociferous anti-Iran hawk. And I think for them, the MEK is really this vessel, this tool to kind of use to increase pressure on Iran and to really try to stoke unrest inside of Iran, stoke chaos, And I think that, again, it betrays their anti-democratic aims, because a group like the MEK, which is widely loathed and despised by the vast majority of Iranians, whether in the diaspora or inside Iran, for them to support this group and to hail it as a political alternative, actually, we've seen that the State Department in recent years, they've been open to this idea that the MEK could be a political alternative for the Iranian people. And we've seen that, John Bolton, for example, has said that, he wanted to celebrate in Tehran with Maryam Rajavi. He openly said that at one of their rallies. Rudy Giuliani is always hailing Maryam Rajavi, hailing her as some kind of democratic alternative, which is, it's far from, it couldn't be as far from the truth. It's a brutal authoritarian cult that is, as we've noted, has really hurt its own members the most. And regardless, so they really pushed, this group has gained prominence in the Trump era, and I think one important role that they played for the Trump people is that they want to portray support from Iranians in the diaspora for this Trump's policies towards Iran, this very destructive, brutal, collectively punishing, mass starvation campaign. And they want to say that, no, this policy actually has support from the Iranian people. And I think this is where the MEK comes in. And we see, especially on social media, that they are very aggressive on social media. They constantly, they're constantly supporting Trump's policies. They have a horde of accounts, massive accounts. We know through people who are tech experts, people who are experts in kind of social media manipulation, that a lot of these accounts are inauthentic, fake accounts. They're really the troll farms from Albania, from elsewhere, that really, day and night they're defending Trump, and they're going after any opponent of Trump's Iran policy, anybody who criticizes these policies, especially Iranian Americans, because for them, in the Washington debate, they want to silence and intimidate critics of Trump from the Iranian American community. So then U.S. policymakers, members of Congress, that they only listen to them, and they think these policies are welcomed by the Iranian people, which is far from the truth. And that's where, we at NIAC, we've come under a lot of attack from these organizations on social media and, on Twitter. And, a chief aim, again, is to silence us, is to intimidate us. Of course, it doesn't work, but, they have all these accounts. They're very organized. They're very coordinated. And actually, one of their main accounts is this Twitter profile called Heshmat Alavi. Now, Heshmat Alavi is a person who is this manufactured identity. The Intercept, a kind of leading U.S. kind of investigative journalist outlet, they did this report last year where they showed that Heshmat Alavi, which is a pro-MEK account that promotes the MEK, supports Trump and supports Trump's policies towards Iran, that they did an investigation where it turned out and they revealed that Heshmat Alavi is actually not a real person. He is kind of a MEK coordinated and engineered account. It's run by multiple people. And the job, again, is to spread misinformation, to support Trump's policies, and to try to slander and smear anyone who opposes Trump's policies. And I'm talking about, not just groups like NIAC and, people who work at NIAC like me, but, analysts, journalists, academics, a lot of the leading practitioners of this field, and kind of people who argue for more sensible U.S. policies towards Iran, people who push for diplomacy and peace, slandering them, smearing them. And so what's very damning is that the Trump administration has actually tried to lend credence to this fake misinformation foreign manipulation campaign, because it's ultimately coming from Albania and these other places. And so we saw that in recent years, White House officials actually cited Heshmat Alavi's articles with journalists to make the points they wanted to make about Iran. And, Trump himself has retweeted Heshmat Alavi several times. So, I mean, it's very damning, again, how they've been using the MEK. And I think it really shows, again, that, the Trump's policies, the goals are not a peaceful, prosperous, democratic Iran. The goals are sow discord, unrest, instability, chaos. And I think the MEK is just a means to that end. And it's this fringe extremist group that does the bidding of, Trump. And I think it's also very important to show that, what the ultimate aims are here. Okay, so the MEK is also very close. There's a lot of evidence, very close with the Israelis, Israelis and the Saudis, their goal is to oppose U.S.-Iran diplomacy at all costs. Their goal is to, kill the nuclear deal, which they've been trying to do, stoke conflict, impoverish the Iranian people, create this destructive internal situation inside Iran. And the MEK, these poor people, many of these people were being held against their will in Albania. They're being used as tools for this very destructive agenda. And we've seen that, the Saudis have been more transparent on how much they support the MEK. Heshmat Alawi, for example, is regularly published in these Saudi outlets like Al Arabiya. And we saw that Turki Al-Faisal, who's a former head of Saudi intelligence, someone who was once very close with Osama bin Laden, and spearheaded a lot of Saudi policies over the past couple decades, and he's kind of survived the purge of MBS and very cleverly made himself still a relevant Saudi figure. But he kind of spoke at an MEK rally a couple years ago, where he openly hailed the group, where he openly supported them, where he said, "We support your aim of regime change in Iran." And also, interestingly, on the topic of Massoud Rajavi and his whereabouts, Turki Al-Faisal actually also said at this rally, this MEK rally, he even mentioned Massoud Rajavi, and he said the late Massoud Rajavi. So he's kind of tacitly acknowledging that, yeah, Massoud Rajavi has died. But anyway, so this guy's a former head of Saudi intelligence, so it couldn't really get more transparent. So when we talk about MEK, this kind of nefarious group that's being taken advantage of like this and used to advance these destructive aims, where their money is coming from. A lot of their money is clearly coming from Saudi Arabia. And I think, we need a lot more investigative journalism in this regard. We need a lot more whistleblowers and people from the inside, formerly members like Mr. Khodabandeh. And, it's very valuable to kind of hear these perspectives, especially in the mainstream U.S. press. And I think, as we look forward with the Biden administration, there is a lot of questions up in the air, clearly. And, Biden has pledged to return to the Iran nuclear deal, pledged to kind of go back to a policy of diplomacy with Iran and kind of reverse this very destructive and ultimately failed maximum pressure campaign of Trump. It's been an utter failure, this policy. And so my hope is, I think the MEK right now, their role, much like the Israelis and Saudis, is to push back as strong as they can against Biden and against his agenda to kind of undo maximum pressure and go back towards diplomacy with Iran. So already we're seeing a lot of efforts to kind of pressure Biden, to hype up, to create these crises with Iran and create these escalations with Iran over these next 60 days before Biden comes to office. And I think the MEK is probably playing a big role in all this, along with the Israelis and the Saudis. And, to what extent they're going to be successful, I think it's unlikely. I think Biden, has pledged to return to the nuclear deal and pledged to kind of turn the page on maximum pressure. And I think in the Biden era, MEK will see how they try to survive. I think, for the sake of these people who are being held there, many of them against their will, I hope that there is a policy, like Mr. Khodabandeh was saying, that it is, they continue with these de-radicalization efforts. They continue providing these people a pathway to kind of re-enter normal life and get out of this cult that has really abused them and misused them more than anybody. Like, they're the biggest victims of the MEK's own membership. And I think, they've been used towards these destructive ends that don't help the Iranian people, don't help any cause worth fighting for. It's purely destructive ends at the behest of these very malign interests like the Saudi government, like the Netanyahu government, that have their own very narrow agendas about their own survival, about taking out Iran as a regional strategic heavyweight. And I think, my hope is that with the Biden era, we can return to some of these policies, as Mr. Khodabandeh was saying, to kind of give these people a pathway to get out of this organization. And, I think when it comes to Albania and Albania hosting this organization, I would hope that the Albanian government, the Albanian journalists, people there who are trying to increasingly track this debate, that they really kind of understand the context here, the background of the MEK, and they really put some pressure there to kind of to help these people ultimately and let them disband this kind of this place that is engaging in so much destructive actions, that is that is holding so many people against their will, and kind of to cooperate with any efforts the Biden administration might want to do to give these people a pathway to getting out of this cult. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Now I do understand why one of the media from Saudi Arabia, or with their money, broadcast their live gathering for 7 hours, because some people ask what's the relation between Saudi Arabia and MEK. I'm glad that you explained for us. You talk about Mr. Biden. Mr. Mohammad Karami from Paris asking, they said, question for Mr. Toossi. Given the circumstance and the election of Mr. Biden, is it possible to deal legally with the Mujahideen terrorist group? What do you think?
Well, I don't know about like dealing legally. I'm not sure what he means. I mean, I think, as Mr. Khodabandeh was saying, and he would know more about this, that, this process that was initiated under the Obama administration to kind of move these people out of Iraq, move them into Albania, but ultimately the idea was that they would be on this pathway to disbanding, this pathway to de-radicalizing. That is the path that the Biden administration and the future State Department must elect. That the MEK is a cultish authoritarian group that has no legitimacy amongst the vast majority of Iranians, and I think, there needs to be a legal path that can kind of, ensure the safety of these people as well. That as they want to leave this organization, as they want to kind of be given a choice, because a lot of these people, if all they have known is the MEK, and if the past 40 years they've just been in this group, they don't know anything else. They can't really work and get out of this org. Like, where are they going to live? Where are they going to have citizenship? Where are they going to have jobs? These things need to be helped in this regard and given a feasible pathway, with legal protections to get out of this organization. And I think when it comes to, you were mentioning Iran International, which is Iran International is this new Farsi language news station set up by the Saudis and with Saudi money. The Guardian, the British newspaper Guardian, had a couple big reports last week showing how this organization is funded by the Saudis. And lo and behold, they're giving a lot of coverage to the MEK, including, as you mentioned, covering their summits, covering their rallies. And this is, ironically, Iran International, their viewer base is obviously, not friendly to the Islamic Republic. But again, testament to the fact that the vast majority of the Iranian people despise the MEK. I know that they got a lot of backlash, and they still get a lot of backlash for covering the MEK, giving them increased coverage. And this just shows that, these nefarious forces at play, such as the Saudi ruling government, Mohammed bin Salman, that these people, they don't care about the Iranian people. They don't care about Iran becoming a prosperous democracy. That's the last thing they want. They just want to prevent America from improving its relations with Iran. They want to keep Iran weak, collapsed if they can get it, disintegrated if they can get it, support these very fringe groups that just create a destructive situation. They talk about the Russians, for example, in America, with all the election interference and all the worry about that here. And I know, like, one thing people often say in the media here is that, the Russians, they intentionally, whatever outside hostile powers, they intentionally support extremist American groups on all sides of the spectrum, both far left groups, far right groups, because their agenda is just to stoke chaos and division in America. And I think when the Saudis, when the U.S., Trump administration, when the Israelis, when they support the MEK, similarly, the goal is not to help the Iranian people. The goal is to support these fringe extremist actors just to create more division, more chaos inside Iran.
Thank you so much. If you would stick around and read some of the comments on our Facebook page, I really appreciate it. And if possible, we may have you again, either today's program or in near future.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.